Hi, welcome to my quilting beehive. I'm Michelle, and today I'm doing a special video for my friends at the Country Peacemakers Quilt Guild retreat this week. This week at retreat, everybody is going to be making a block for a charity quilt, and it's the 6-inch Vintage Kite block by Lori Holt of Bee in My Bonnet Quilts, and it's a foundation piece, paper piece, foundation piece block that we will be doing together at retreat. Sadly, I'm not there to help you do this, but I'm going to make this video to get you through it, and hopefully you'll love paper piecing by the time we're done. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to look at your foundation. You'll see that it has 1, 2, 3, and it's repeated 4 times. So each unit is part of the block. So we're going to start by cutting this apart into 4 separate units because we're going to make 4 parts and put them together. You'll see this dotted line down the center is where you're going to cut it apart. And I like to use my old rotary cutter for that with an older blade, so I'm not cutting paper with my good cutter. So you're just going to cut it apart into 4 pieces. And then we're going to make 4, and you can see when you take them apart, they're identical units like that. The first thing you need to know is what size fabric you need to cut to make sure it covers it. And we figured that out for you for your kit, and I'm going to show you how you'll do that in case you're doing a different foundation piece and want to know. Always start with piece 1 and look for the line between piece 1 and piece 2. I line up my ruler and I leave a 1/4 inch overlap from 1 into 2. And then I lay my ruler so I know it's a 1/4 inch past here, and it's going to be a 1/4 inch everywhere around. And we've determined that size for you, and it's going to be 3 inches by 3.5 inches, and it's going to lay right there, and it'll cover piece 1 and be ready to sew on piece 2. So 3 by 3.5. But if you're using any other pattern and you want to figure out how to do it, place your ruler on there and see, okay, 3 inches is plenty big to get past the paper. 3.5 inches here gets you out past the edge of that line, the edge of the paper. So that's why we're using 3 by 3.5 for that. And those pieces are cut for you already if you're at the retreat. And then for piece 2, again, you're going to do the same thing. You lay your ruler 1/4 inch past the line between 1 and 2 and line it up and see how far it needs to go to pass in all directions. 4 inches is plenty to get past the length of it. And because we made this one 3.5, we're going to make this 3.5 so they line up nicely. So we're going to go 3.5 by 4, and it'll extend past the point that you need. So you're going to cut that 3.5 by 4. And your next piece is the same size, so it's the same piece, it's just flipped over. So 3.5 by 4 will cover both of those. So anytime you're paper piecing, if you're not sure, just check your ruler out, place it on there, and say, how big does that rectangle need to be to cover that? Once you're ready, you're going to cut your pieces, and you're going to need 1 colored rectangle for each point of the star. So I have 4 different ones to make it a scrappy star. And then your background, you need 2 for each corner, so you're going to need 8 background rectangles to do all your background parts. Then you're going to take your paper over by your sewing machine, and you're always going to put the piece on the back. So you're going to sew on the front, and you're going to put your fabric on the back. And it's nice if you have a sewing machine, you can put it up against the light or hold it up to the window or hold it up to the light so you can see through your paper. And piece 1 is going to go on there, and you want it to be right side up on the back of the paper. And you want to make it so it's a 1/4 inch past where 1 and 2 overlap. And when you held it up to the light, you can see that there. And you want to make sure it's shifted over enough so the whole piece is covered with fabric when you're shining it through, like that. So piece 1 looks pretty good there. It's about a 1/4 inch, doesn't have to be exact, but about a 1/4 inch past 2. Then you'll take a piece of fabric, background fabric, and it's going to end up here, but we have to put it right sides together on top of that one. And then you can check to make sure it's a 1/4 inch past the line between 1 and 2. So you want to cover all of 1 and go 1/4 inch past into 2. And you could put a pin in that if you like pinning. Pin right through the paper and the fabric to hold it in place. And I pinned away from the edge that I'm sewing, because that first line I'm sewing is the line between 1 and 2. Now you'll notice if you look closely on your paper, there's a dot. That's your starting point and ending point of the seam line. You can start past it because the trim line's over here. So you can sew into the seam allowance on this side, but not on this side. On this side, you're going to want to stop sewing right at the dot, because after we sew, we're going to have to fold this paper, and if you sew past it, you'll be sewing into where that line is, and we don't want to go past it. So we're going to sew exactly to that dot, but we can go past it on this side. So stop. When you're ready to sew, you're going to want to shorten your stitch length. My machine defaults to 2.5. When I normally piece, I piece at a 2.0. I'm going to bump it down to 1.8 or 1.6 so you have a tight stitch. You want it as small as it can be without being impossible to rip out if you make a mistake and want to remove it. So 1.8 is where I'm going to go today on this one. And then I'm going to line up my foot. So I'm sewing right on the line, and I'm going to stop when I get to that dot right there. And I'm slowing down near the end so I can stop right on the dot. You can do a back stitch here so it doesn't come undone. And then you have to cut it and pull it out. After you sew your line with a nice tight stitch, you are going to bring it to your ironing board, and you're going to press the second one towards fabric 2, towards cover the rectangle that was there, and just hit it with your iron. And you'll see it's bigger than triangle 2, so triangle 1 and triangle 2 are, I guess that's a kite, and triangle 2 are covered with fabric on the back of the paper. Before we add the next piece, we're going to use an add-a-quarter ruler to trim where piece 3 is going to go. So you're going to fold the paper on the line between piece 1 and 3, because piece 3 is going on next, and that's where it's going to attach right there. Fold it back. And what's nice about an add-a-quarter ruler is it has a ridge, and you can slide that ridge and it'll catch on the paper, and you can see the ruler still has about 1/4 of an inch, exactly 1/4 of an inch past the paper. So that's how we get our perfect seam allowance over there. And you're just going to cut off the extra that you don't need. So now I know piece 1 is going to join to piece 3 over here. After you trim it, you're going to bring it back to your sewing machine, and you're going to add piece 3 on the back. Now piece 3 is supposed to go over here, so we're going to flip it over right sides together with piece 1 and 2, like that. And then you can pin it to hold it. I'm just going to flip it over and leave it right there and bring it to my machine. Now because this is the last piece, it's okay if I cross the line because we're not going to be folding anywhere here. So I'm going to go right from seam allowance right across it. And we're going to start right here. And again, a tight stitch so it makes it easier to tear the paper away. If you have a tight stitch, it kind of perforates the paper, so it'll be easy to remove the paper at the end. And so now I've sewn on line 1, 2, and then between 1 and 3. When I flip this over, we're going to bring it to the ironing board and press it. When you get to the ironing board, you're going to flip the background piece over piece 3 so it's on the back of the paper, and hit that with your iron to make it nice and flat. The seam allowances are going towards the background 2 and 3 on there. Now we're going to get ready to trim our block. You're going to flip it over and trim from the back so you can see the whole triangle. If you look carefully, you'll see there's some lines that say first trim and sewing line. Make sure you trim on the line that says first trim. Use your favorite ruler, line it up with the line, and cut carefully to remove all the extra. Those little pieces are great for your crumb block quilts. If you don't do crumb block quilts, save your pieces for Bee if you're at the Country Peacemaker's retreat, because she will use them for you. Trim all 3 sides to make yourself a perfect triangle. And there you go. Then you're going to repeat that to make 4 sections that are like this with 4 different kite pieces in the center, and you can lay them out and you'll see your kite, vintage kite block. Bring it to your sewing machine, and then it will be time to sew the pieces together. Sew 2 of them, the top 2 together. When you do that, you'll see there's a point, a dot on your line. That's the point you need to match. So you're going to put a pin right into that point, line it up perfectly, and then put it into the point on the back side as well. When I do this, I like to pull the pin all the way through and pull them tight together so that point is going to line up perfectly. Once it's perfectly together, hold it tight, and I like to flip the pin around so it's not in the way and stick it in there. Then you're going to bring it to your machine, make sure your edges line up perfectly, and bring it to your machine and sew on the sew line. When you get to the pin, make sure you stop and remove the pin so you don't hit it. Get close to it without going over it. You don't want to hit that with your needle. Pull the pin out and then finish sewing the seam. You're going to repeat that with the second side, matching up the points. Put the pin right into the dot that's on the paper. It shows you where to line it up, and the dot on the other side. And it's right in the ditch between the 2 fabrics that you're matching up. Pull it all the way through, make sure it's nice and tight so they line up. You can see right there, that's how they're lining up right between the 2 seams. Pull it tight and stick the pin in to hold it together. Make sure the edges line up at the top and bottom and sew that seam. My bottom needed to be adjusted a little bit here, so I'm straightening it out. You can add another pin if you want to. I'm just going to hold it and sew that seam. Be careful not to hit the pin. Make sure when you get to it you stop and pull the pin out. And finish sewing all the way to the edge. If you need to adjust it, wait till you pass the point that you're trying to match so you don't adjust it and make that point shift. Now you're going to remove the paper from the seam allowance only, so fold it back on the perforated line that you've stitched, and just remove those little bits of paper from the seam line. So when you iron them, they don't get folded in. A tight stitch will make those come off nice and easy. Remove it on both sides, the front and the back of the seam allowance. Once you have all the paper removed on both sides, you can bring them to your ironing board, and you want to press the seams in opposite directions so that they'll nest in the center seam. Look at your block, lay it out, make sure it's all aligned correctly, and I'm going to press mine towards the purple fabric and then towards the orange fabric so they go opposite each other. And then just press them with your iron, nice and flat, and then do the second one. Open it up, use finger press it into place, and then use your iron, hold it there, and it'll be ready to go. Going to bring those back to your sewing machine and put the last 2 halves together. When you put the final 2 halves together, you're going to match the 2 points and your center seam. Your center seam nests, so you can nest those together like you would on any quilt block. Make sure that 2 seam allowances are abutted next to each other and put a pin to hold them. Then the other 2 points have dots just like the first ones, and you can put your pin through the dot to line up those points. Put it through the dot on the first one, then the dot on the second one, and pull it through tight so they stay right together. Once they're tight together, flip your pin around so it's not in your way. And then you're going to do it with your second spot. Put the pin right through the dots, line them up, pull it through tight, and then flip the pin around out of your way so you can sew. And then you'll be sewing on the dotted line that says sew line right across from end to end to finish your block. And you're still using the 1.8 inch, a small tight stitch, because we want to be able to remove the paper easily. A tight stitch lets you do that more easily. Sew right to the pin, stop before you get to it so you don't hit the pin. You don't want to hurt your machine or bend any pins. Go slow to get to the pin, remove the pin, and you're almost done. If that last edge needs to be adjusted, wait till you pass the point that you're matching, and then you can adjust it if needed. Make sure it's all lined up, and finish your seam. Then you're going to remove your paper the same way. Adjust the seam allowance, fold it back, and tear it right off. Make sure you remove the paper from both the front and the back in the seam allowance. I've removed all the paper from my seam allowance on both sides, and now it's just time to press it. And you can just press it to one side, finger press it to hold it in place, and then use your iron to press it all flat. And that is your star. Now, you do need to remove the paper, and to make it easier, we've already moved it in the seam allowance, but if you start with number 3 and pull it away, fold on that line, and it'll just tear right off. And then come to number 2, fold it back, give it a press, and it'll tear right off. And number 1 will come right off because there's nothing on it. Repeat that with each one. By removing that seam allowance first, it made it very easy to remove the papers. Remove all your papers, and then you'll have a block. You can trim your 4 dog ears, and it will be a perfect 6.5 inch square ready to sew into a 6 inch finished block.